The orbital station hung in the void like a monument to humanity's failure. Commander Garrett Callahan stood at attention in the docking bay, his dress uniform pressing against his shoulders that had grown accustomed to combat armor. 5 years of war, and this was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory, not in one final desperate charge, but in a sterile diplomatic chamber, where the victors would receive the formal surrender of Earth's remaining military forces. The uniform felt wrong, too clean, too pressed, too much like a costume for a role he never wanted to play. Around him, other human officers stood in rigid formation. Admirals who had commanded fleets now reduced to scattered remnants, generals who had orchestrated brilliant retreats across a dozen star systems. The finest military minds humanity had ever produced gathered together to kneel before the enemy that had broken them. Garrett kept his eyes forward, his jaw set, his breathing controlled. He had learned long ago to master his emotions in moments like these. The rage, the grief, the bitter taste of defeat. All of it locked away behind the mask of discipline that had kept him alive through 5 years of hell. The pressure seals hissed. The massive doors at the far end of the bay began to slide open, and Garrett felt every human spine in the room straighten just a little more. Pride. Even now, even in defeat, they would not give the Serani the satisfaction of seeing humanity cower. The alien delegation entered first. Tall figures in flowing ceremonial robes, their silver skin catching the artificial light and reflecting it in patterns that seemed almost luminescent. Their eyes, those unsettling violet orbs that humanity had learned to fear across countless battlefields, swept across the assembled officers with expressions that were impossible to read. And then she appeared. Empress Valith of the Serani Empire. Garrett had studied her image countless times during the war. Intelligence briefings intercepted communications analysis of her tactical decisions. He had built a mental picture of a towering warlord, a ruthless conqueror who had orchestrated the systematic dismantling of human civilization across the stars. The reality was something else entirely. She was smaller than he had imagined, barely reaching his shoulder with delicate features that seemed almost fragile beneath the weight of the ornate crown that adorned her head. Her silver skin had a subtle luminescence, as if starlight had been woven into her very flesh. And those violet eyes, the same eyes that had watched from command centers as her fleets burned human colonies, held something he had not expected to see. Weariness. She moved through the docking bay with the measured grace of someone who had spent a lifetime being watched, every step calculated, every gesture precise. Her guards flanked her in perfect formation, but Garrett noticed how they watched her. Not just with the alertness of protectors, but with something deeper. Devotion, perhaps, or reverence. Admiral Douglas Whitmore stepped forward to meet her, his voice carrying the formal tones of surrender that humanity had never thought it would have to speak. Your Imperial Majesty, on behalf of the United Earth Defense Command, I present the formal instrument of surrender as agreed upon in the preliminary negotiations. The Empress received the ceremonial document with hands that did not tremble. She passed it to an aide without reading it, her eyes instead moving across the assembled human officers. Searching, evaluating. When her gaze reached Garrett, it stopped. He felt the weight of that violet stare like a physical force pressing against the walls he had built around his emotions. She was studying him with an intensity that went beyond casual observation. There was recognition there, he realized. She knew who he was. Commander Callahan. Her voice was softer than he had expected, carrying a melodic accent that made human standard sound almost musical. She stepped away from the formal proceedings, moving toward him, while her guards shifted nervously. Your record speaks of remarkable tactical innovation. The Battle of Proxima IV was elegant in its execution. Garrett met her gaze without flinching. We still lost. You did. She tilted her head slightly, that strange alien gesture that might have meant anything. But you made us bleed for every kilometer. I lost my cousin in that battle. Prince Kalon commanded the third assault wave. Something flickered in Garrett's chest. He had seen the intelligence reports on that engagement. The third wave had been the key to the Serani offensive, and he had concentrated everything he had on breaking it. The command vessel had been his primary target. I lost 3,000 soldiers, he said, his voice harder than he intended, and I lost family. Those violet eyes held his for a long moment. It seems we have both paid prices we did not anticipate. Before Garrett could respond, Admiral Whitmore cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the treaty provisions regarding military liaison assignments. Yes, the Empress turned back to the formal proceedings, but Garrett noticed how her attention seemed to linger on him even as she addressed the Admiral. The integration protocols will proceed as negotiated. Selected human officers will serve as advisors to Serrani Command, facilitating the transition to peaceful administration. Advisors, a polite term for hostages. Garrett understood the political reality well enough. The Serrani needed human faces to legitimize their occupation officers, whose presence would reassure the conquered population that cooperation was possible. And they needed leverage against any remaining resistance cells that might consider continuing the fight. Commander Callahan, he snapped back to attention as the Empress spoke his name again. You will accompany my personal staff aboard the Sovereign's Grace. Your tactical expertise will be valuable as we work to stabilize the border regions. The words hung in the air like a death sentence dressed in diplomatic language. Personal staff. He was being claimed as a trophy, a prize to display before her court as proof of humanity's submission. As your majesty commands, he said because there was nothing else to say. Something flickered in those violet eyes. Surprise perhaps at his compliance, or calculation as she evaluated the man she had just claimed. Gather your effects, Commander. We depart in 1 hour. She turned and walked away, her guards falling into formation around her. Garrett watched her go, his mind already working through the implications. He was being singled out, specifically requested. That meant something, though he could not yet determine what. Admiral Whitmore appeared at his side as soon as the Serrani delegation had left the bay. Garrett, the older man's voice was low-pitched to avoid the ears of nearby officers. I know what you're thinking. Do you, sir? You're thinking this is humiliation, degradation, being paraded around as her pet human. Whitmore's weathered face showed the strain of the past 5 years, the weight of decisions that had cost millions of lives. But I need you to think bigger than that. With respect, Admiral, I'm not sure there is a bigger picture anymore. There's always a bigger picture. Whitmore placed a hand on Garrett's shoulder. She requested you specifically. Out of all our surviving officers, all our tactical specialists, all our decorated commanders, she asked for you by name. Which means she wants to humiliate us by taking our best. Maybe. The Admiral's eyes were sharp despite his exhaustion. Or maybe she wants to understand us. 5 years of war, Garrett. 5 years of her studying our tactics, our culture, our broadcasts. She probably knows more about you than you realize. That thought disturbed Garrett more than the assignment itself. The idea that the Empress had been watching him, analyzing him, building a profile of who he was and how he thought. It made him feel exposed in a way that enemy fire never had. What are you asking me to do, sir? I'm asking you to survive, to adapt, to learn everything you can about their command and structure, their politics, their weaknesses. Whitmore's grip tightened on his shoulder. The war may be over, but the future isn't written yet. And I need eyes inside their power structure. Real eyes, not politicians playing diplomatic games. You're asking me to be a spy. I'm asking you to be what you've always been. A soldier who does what needs to be done regardless of the personal cost. The Admiral released him and stepped back. 1 hour, Commander. Don't keep the Empress waiting. The Sovereign's Grace was a cathedral of metal and light. Garrett stood at the viewport of his assigned quarters, watching the stars drift past as the massive vessel moved through space at speeds that human technology could barely comprehend. The ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of anything humanity had ever built, and every surface seemed designed to remind its occupants of the power and majesty of the Serrani Empire. His quarters were surprisingly spacious. Not a cell, but not comfortable either. Everything was slightly wrong in ways that kept him perpetually off balance. The angles of the walls were too sharp, meeting at degrees that seemed to defy geometry. The gravity was a fraction too light, making every step feel like he might float away if he wasn't careful. The air carried scents he couldn't identify, alien and unsettling. A chime announced a visitor. Garrett straightened his uniform and moved to the door, expecting guards, or perhaps one of the Empress's staff, come to deliver instructions. Instead, when the door slid open, he found himself face to face with the Empress herself, alone. She stood in the corridor without her guards, without her ceremonial robes, dressed in simple clothing that made her look almost ordinary. almost human in a way that was somehow more unsettling than her full imperial regalia. "May I enter?" He stepped aside, too surprised to refuse. She moved past him into the quarters, her eyes taking in the sparse furnishings, the untouched bed, the viewport where he had been standing. "You have not slept." It was not a question. "I've had a lot to think about." She moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars with an expression that might have been contemplation or might have been something else entirely. "I wanted to speak with you privately, without the performance that public appearances require." Performance. The Empress must be strong, unyielding, perfect in every moment, in every decision. She glanced at him, and for just an instant, he saw past the mask she wore. "But I am not always those things, especially not now." Garrett remained by the door, maintaining the distance between them. "Why am I here? The real reason." Valeth was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls of the small room. "Because I am tired of being surrounded by those who tell me what I want to hear. Because in 5 years of war, you were the only human commander who fought with honor even in defeat." She paused, her silver fingers tracing the edge of the viewport. "Because I need to understand what we have done. What I have done." "You won. Isn't that understanding enough?" "We won." The word came out flat, almost bitter. "And lost more than you know. My people celebrate victory while I count the king. 2 million soldiers dead. Countless resources expended. And for what?" She turned to face him fully, those violet eyes searching his face for something he couldn't identify. "Your military ethics puzzle my advisors. Your treatment of prisoners. Your refusal to use biological weapons even when losing your insistence on protecting civilian populations even at tactical cost. They call it weakness. And I call it something we have forgotten." She moved toward the door, then paused. "You hate me, I accept that. But I hope in time you might help me understand why humanity chose honor over survival. Perhaps then I can help my people remember what we have lost in becoming conquerors." She left without waiting for a response. Garrett stood at the viewport for a long time after she was gone, watching the stars drift past. The Empress was not what he had expected. That made her far more dangerous than any enemy he had faced on the battlefield. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that Garrett slowly learned to navigate. Mornings began with tactical briefings where the Empress dissected human battle strategies with surgical precision. She would display holographic recreations of engagements, zooming in on specific decisions, asking questions that revealed an understanding of military theory that rivaled any Earth Academy graduate. And she would pause mid-analysis to ask his opinion. The first time it happened, Garrett had been certain it was a trap, some test to see if he would contradict her in front of her generals. But she had listened when he corrected her assumptions, genuinely listened, incorporating his insights into her analysis without defensiveness or ego. Her generals bristled at this. Garrett could see it in their posture, in the tight lines around their violet eyes. A conquered enemy advising their Empress was an insult to everything they believed about Serrani's superiority. General Drivik was the worst of them. He was old for a Serrani, his silver skin marked with the scars of battles fought long before humanity had reached the stars. He watched Garrett with an intensity that went beyond mere hostility, a personal hatred that seemed to burn in his violet eyes whenever their gazes met. "Commander Callahan suggests our assessment of human defensive psychology is incomplete," Valeth said during one session, displaying footage from the siege of Titan Station. 6 months of hell compressed into glowing tactical displays and casualty figures. "We assumed desperation would lead to surrender. Instead, it intensified resistance." "Explain, Commander." Garrett studied the display. He had been there in those tunnels, watching his soldiers die one by one as they held positions that had no strategic value except for the time they bought. "You're looking at numbers," he said. "Casualty ratios, resource expenditure, territorial control. But we saw faces. Every day we held was another day for the evacuation transports. 300,000 civilians made it out because we stayed." Drivik sneered. "Meaningless sacrifice. The station fell anyway." "The people didn't." Garrett met the general's eyes without flinching. "That's the point you keep missing. We don't measure victory in territory held. We measure it in lives saved." A muscle twitched in Dravik's jaw. For a moment, Garrett thought the general might strike him, but Vaella's voice cut through the tension. Continue your analysis, Commander. Dravik subsided, but his hatred remained a constant pressure that Garrett could feel even when the general was not in the room. Afternoons were stranger. The Empress insisted he accompany her on routine inspections, diplomatic meetings, even personal time in the observation galleries. At first, Garrett assumed she wanted to flaunt her prize hostage to demonstrate her power by parading the conquered enemy before her court. But she did not parade him. Instead, she talked. Philosophy, art, the weight of command, and the loneliness of decisions that killed thousands. My mother prepared me for rulership, she said one evening as they walked the upper decks where vast windows revealed the endless dark between stars. But not for this, not for the emptiness that comes after victory. Is this why I'm here, so you can feel better about the war? She looked at him sharply, and he saw the flash of something that might have been anger or might have been hurt. No, I will never feel better about it. But I need to understand what we fought. She paused at a window, her silver reflection ghosting across the glass. My people see humans as primitive aggressors. Yet you write poetry even in trenches. You create art even facing extinction. This contradiction fascinates me. We're not complicated, we just want to survive. Everyone wants to survive, Commander. But you want more. You want meaning and survival. Purpose, yes. She straightened, her eyes fixed on something far beyond the window. My people have forgotten this. We survive through conquest, through strength. We have forgotten to ask why. Before Garrett could respond, alarms shrieked through the ship. The corridor's peaceful atmosphere shattered as emergency lights began to pulse. Vaella's personal guards appeared instantly, but she was already moving her stride purposeful as she headed for the bridge. Come with me, Commander. He followed without hesitation. The Bridge of the Sovereign's Grace was a masterpiece of alien engineering, curved surfaces and floating displays that seemed to respond to thought as much as touch. The crew moved with disciplined efficiency, but Garrett could read the tension in their posture. Report, Vaellath commanded as she took her position at the central command platform. Distress signal from the Varath mining colony, Your Majesty. The tactical officer's hands flew across his console, pulling up a system display. Raiders of unknown origin, heavy assault in progress. Show me. The main display shifted to show a small world orbiting a distant star. Ships swarmed around the colony's orbital infrastructure, weapons fire lighting up the void like angry stars. 12,000 civilians, the tactical officer continued. Minimal defensive capability. Third Fleet is 4 hours away. Dravik stepped forward. Your Majesty, we are 1 hour from the colony. But the Sovereign's Grace is a command vessel, not a battleship. Engaging would be tactically inadvisable. Garrett watched the display, his mind automatically calculating trajectories, engagement patterns, potential strategies. The raiders were using hit-and-run tactics, staying mobile, avoiding direct confrontation. Familiar tactics, human tactics. 12,000 civilians, Vaellath repeated. Her voice was soft, but something in it made every officer on the bridge straighten. We go. Now, battle stations. Dravik's face tightened. Your Majesty, the risk is acceptable. She turned to Garrett, and he saw something in her eyes that he recognized. The same look he had seen in the mirror during the siege of Titan Station. The look of someone who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. Your input would be appreciated, Commander. The bridge fell silent. Every Serani officer stared at her, disbelief written across their alien features. She was asking a human, a prisoner, to advise on combat operations. Garrett moved to the secondary tactical station, his hands finding the controls with surprising ease. The interface was alien, but the principles were the same. These ships, he said, pulling up the attack patterns, they're using our guerrilla strategies. Modified, but the core approach is ours. Quick strikes against weak points, withdrawal before superior force can respond, keeping defenders reactive rather than proactive. Can you counter it? He looked at her. You want me to help you fight people using human tactics? I want you to help me save 12,000 Serani civilians who will die if we fail. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Your oath was to protect the innocent, Commander. Does the species matter? The question hit him like a physical blow. All his training, all his experience, all his hatred for the Empire, that had destroyed humanity's hopes for the stars. And this woman was asking him to set it aside, to help the enemy, to save lives. His hands moved across the tactical display before he had fully decided. They're expecting you to chase. Don't. Use the asteroid field here as a choke point. He highlighted a region of space near the colony. Force them to commit to a direct engagement or retreat. Their tactics only work if they can stay mobile. Valeth looked at General Dravik. Implement Commander Callahan's strategy. The general's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. For a long moment, Garrett thought he might refuse. But military discipline won out over personal hatred. As you command, Your Majesty. The battle was brief and brutal. The raiders caught between the asteroid field and the Sovereign's Grace's superior firepower found themselves unable to execute the hit-and-run tactics they had relied upon. 3 enemy ships were destroyed in the initial engagement. The rest broke and ran scattering into the void. Garrett watched the tactical display as the colony's communication channels flooded with messages of gratitude. 12,000 lives saved because a human prisoner had helped the Serani fight like humans. The irony was not lost on him. 12,000 Serani lives, Valeth said quietly, moving to stand beside him at the tactical station. Saved because you helped us. How does that feel? Garrett stared at the display at the retreating blips that represented ships using tactics he had helped develop during the war. Like a betrayal, he said, and like the right thing to do. I hate that both are true. She placed a hand on his arm. The first time she had touched him, and the contact sent an unexpected shock through his system. Not unpleasant, but alien. Different. That tension you feel, she said, between hatred and compassion. That is what I need you to teach me. My people have forgotten how to feel both at once. We see only enemies or allies' strength or weakness. We have lost the ability to hold contradictions in our hearts. She withdrew her hand and turned to address the bridge crew. But something had shifted between them. Something small, perhaps, but real. That night, Garrett lay in his quarters and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He kept seeing the casualty reports from the colony. Lives saved because he had helped. Serani lives, enemy lives. Or were they enemies anymore? The question disturbed him more than any weapon. 3 more weeks passed. Garrett found himself drawn deeper into the Empress's inner circle, not as a hostage or a trophy, but as something he had not anticipated. An advisor, a voice she actually listened to. He attended meetings where the fate of entire star systems was decided. He offered tactical assessments that were incorporated into official strategy. He walked the corridors of the Sovereign's Grace and noticed that the crew had stopped staring at him with open hostility. Now they simply watched, uncertain what to make of the human who had earned their Empress's attention. But it was the private conversations that affected him most. Why didn't you use the biological weapons? They were in the upper galleries again, surrounded by the vast silence of space visible through towering windows. Valeth had asked the question without preamble, as if it had been building inside her for weeks. Garrett considered his response carefully. We developed them as a deterrent. The theory was that the threat alone would be enough. But when you were losing, when your colonies were burning and your fleets were shattered, why not use them then? Because some prices are too high. He watched the distant stars, each one a sun with worlds that might have known peace or war. We talked about it at the end. The generals, the admirals, the politicians who were still alive. We had weapons that could have killed billions of Serani civilians. We could have made victory so costly that you might have accepted a negotiated peace. Why didn't you? He turned to face her. Because then we would have become something we couldn't live with. We would have survived, maybe, but we wouldn't have been human anymore. Not in any way that mattered. Valeth was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My cousin, Prince Kalon. He was young, eager to prove himself. He volunteered to lead the 3rd assault wave at Proxima 4 because he believed in our cause. He believed that humanity was a threat that had to be contained. I'm sorry for your loss. Are you to... She looked at him with those violet eyes that saw too much. You killed him. You gave the order that destroyed his ship. Yes. There was no point in denying it. I was defending my people. He was attacking them. One of us was going to die. And you feel no guilt. I feel guilt for every death I've caused, every Serrani soldier, every human soldier who followed my orders into situations they didn't come back from. He held her gaze. But I can't regret doing my duty, just like Kalon was doing his. Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The recognition of one soldier for another across the gulf of species and war. 5 years, she said. 5 years I studied you, your tactics, your decisions, your broadcasts to your troops. I thought I was learning how to defeat you. Instead, I think I was learning something else entirely. What's that? That winning is not the same as being right. She turned back to the windows. My people celebrate our victory. They see humanity as conquered, as proof of Serrani's superiority. But you lost everything and still you hold to your principles. Still you refuse to become what we accused you of being. Is that why you really brought me here? She was quiet for a long time. When she answered, her voice carried the weight of an empire. I brought you here because I am surrounded by millions who worship me, and not one who will tell me the truth. I brought you here because in 5 years of war, you were the only enemy I respected. And I brought you here because I need to understand what we've become, what I've become, for it's too late to change. The gallery hummed around them, the soft vibration of the ship's engines, a constant reminder of the technology that separated their peoples. Beyond the windows, the stars of the Empire stretched into infinity worlds that had known only war, now facing the uncertain promise of peace. The intelligence came through channels Garrett had not expected still existed. One of his former subordinates, a communications specialist who had been assigned to a different Serrani vessel, had managed to embed coded messages in routine data transfers. The information was fragmentary, but what it revealed sent a chill down Garrett's spine. The raiders who had attacked the mining colony had not been independent pirates. They had been using Serrani military identification codes. Garrett spent 3 nights analyzing the data, cross-referencing it with what he had learned about Serrani internal politics. The picture that emerged was troubling. Someone within the Empire was testing tactics, building capabilities, preparing for something larger than a simple raid on a mining colony. He should have kept the information to himself, should have passed it back and through the same channels it had arrived, let his own people use it to find weaknesses in the Serrani power structure. But he thought about 12,000 civilians, about the Empress, who had asked him to save them, about the conversations where she had admitted her doubts and fears. He made his decision. You should not be here. Valeth looked up from her meditation as Garrett entered her private chambers without authorization. 2 guards moved to intercept him, but she raised a hand. Leave us. The guards hesitated but obeyed. When the door closed behind them, Garrett crossed to where she sat and activated a small device. Jamming field, he explained, in case anyone is listening. You have my attention, Commander. This had better be important. The raiders who attacked the mining colony, they weren't independent. They were using Serrani military codes. He pulled out a small data crystal. I've been analyzing the attack patterns, cross-referencing with fleet deployments. Someone in your military is running unauthorized operations, testing tactics. Valeth took the crystal, her expression unreadable. You could have kept this information, used it against us. I could have. Why didn't you? Garrett met her eyes. Because you asked me about honor, about why humans choose principles over survival. This is what it means, telling the truth even when it doesn't benefit me. She was silent for a long moment, turning the crystal over in her silver fingers. When she looked up, there was something new in her violet eyes. You realize what this means. Someone close to power is planning something. Rebellion, perhaps, or a coup. I know. And you've made yourself a target by bringing me this information. Whoever is behind this will know you're the source. I know that too. Valeth rose from her meditation position, moving closer to him than she ever had before. Why, Commander? Why risk yourself for an empire you hate, for a people who conquered your own? Garrett thought about the question, about the galleries and the tactical briefings and the slow erosion of certainties he had carried through 5 years of war. Because maybe building something new matters more than holding on to old hatreds, he said. Because maybe that's what it takes to create something better than what we had before. She studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. We will investigate this together, quietly, and when we find the truth, we deal with it, whatever it takes. For the first time since his capture, Garrett saw something like hope in the Empress's eyes. And despite everything, despite the war and the hatred and the impossible gulf between their peoples, he felt an answering spark in his own chest. They were enemies who had become something else. What that something was, neither of them could say. But as they began to plan their investigation, Garrett realized that the hollow victory the Serrani had won might be transformed into something neither side had imagined, if they survived long enough to see it through. The weeks that followed moved with a rhythm Garrett had not anticipated. What had begun as captivity had transformed into something far more complex. He found himself woven into the fabric of the Empress's daily life present, at councils where the fate of billions was decided, walking beside her through corridors where courtiers whispered behind silver hands. The whispers did not bother him. He had endured worse than gossip. What bothered him was how natural it had become. Valeth insisted on his presence during morning briefings, afternoon inspections, evening diplomatic receptions. At first, the court had assumed she was displaying her trophy, the conquered human commander paraded before them, as proof of Serrani superiority. But as the weeks passed, that assumption began to crumble. She was not displaying him. She was learning from him. And the court did not know what to make of that. The private alcove adjoining Valeth's chambers had become their refuge. A small space lined with ancient Serrani tapestries depicting the empire's founding, where rank and protocol dissolved into honest conversation. Here she was not the empress. Here he was not the prisoner. They were simply two people trying to understand each other across a gulf of species and war. My mother died when I was young, Valeth said, one evening, her silver fingers tracing the patterns woven into one of the tapestries, before she could finish preparing me for the throne. I was raised by advisors, by generals, by politicians, who each wanted to shape me into their vision of what an empress should be. Garrett watched her from his position near the doorway. The soft lighting painted her in shades of silver and shadow. What did you want to be? She smiled, and there was sadness in it. I wanted to be worthy. Worthy of the crown, worthy of my people, worthy of the legacy my mother left behind. The smile faded. Instead, I became a conqueror. I led armies that burned worlds. I ordered attacks that killed millions. And now I sit upon a throne built on the bones of your people and wonder if any of it was worth the cost. Is that why you wanted me here, to punish yourself? Perhaps. She turned to face him fully. Or perhaps I wanted someone who would look at me and see not the empress, not the symbol, but the woman who made terrible choices and must live with them. I've made terrible choices too. You fought to protect your people. I fought to win. And when winning wasn't possible, I fought to make losing hurt as much as possible. He moved closer, close enough to see the subtle luminescence of her skin. I gave orders that sent thousands to their deaths. I targeted supply lines knowing civilians would starve. I destroyed ships knowing there were families aboard. That is war. That's what we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. He shook his head. The truth is, I don't know if I'm any better than you. I just lost, so I never had to face what victory would have made me. Valeth was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You are not what I expected, Garrett Callahan. It was the first time she had used his first name. Neither are you, he admitted. Something passed between them in that moment. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The recognition of two souls who had been shaped by the same forge, even if they had emerged on opposite sides. The investigation into the raiders consumed Garrett's nights. Using the intelligence networks he had quietly maintained, combined with access that his position near the Empress provided, he began to build a picture of what was happening in the shadows of the Serrani Empire. The pattern was subtle, almost invisible, unless you knew what to look for. Ships that disappeared from fleet rosters for days at a time. Resource allocations that didn't match official records. Communication bursts encrypted with codes that even Imperial intelligence couldn't crack. And at the center of it all, a name that kept appearing. General Dravik. Garrett had suspected from the beginning. The hatred in the old warrior's eyes went beyond simple xenophobia. There was something personal there, something that burned with an intensity that ordinary prejudice could not explain. He dug deeper. The records were fragmentary, scattered across classified databases that required careful navigation to access without triggering alerts. But piece by piece, the picture emerged. Dravik had a son, Captain Torek. Young, ambitious, eager to prove himself in the war against humanity. He had volunteered to lead the third assault wave at Proxima 4, seeing it as his chance to distinguish himself. Garrett remembered that battle with perfect clarity. The desperate defense, the dwindling ammunition, the impossible choice between holding the line and preserving his remaining forces. He remembered identifying the command vessel of the third wave, remembered giving the order to concentrate fire, remembered watching it break apart in the void. He had killed Dravik's son. But there was more. 3 months after Proxima 4, Dravik's wife had taken her own life. The official records called it an accident, but the medical files told a different story. She had walked into an airlock and opened the outer door. Grief, unbearable, consuming grief that had hollowed out everything she was until death seemed preferable to continued existence. Garrett stared at the files for a long time, something cold settling in his chest. He understood Dravik's hatred now. It wasn't about species or empire or political ideology. It was about a father who had lost his son and a husband who had lost his wife, and the human commander who had set those tragedies in motion. Dravik didn't want to defeat humanity. He wanted to destroy the peace that made his family's deaths meaningless. You seem troubled. Garrett looked up from the tactical display to find Valeth watching him with those violet eyes that saw too much. I've been thinking about the raiders. Have you learned something new? He hesitated. The information he had gathered was explosive. If he shared it, he would be condemning Dravik to certain death. A Serani general planning a rebellion against the Empress would face execution regardless of his motivations. But if he stayed silent, thousands might die in the chaos of civil war. I know who's behind it, he said finally. Valeth's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted. Tell me. General Dravik. The name hung in the air between them. Valeth was silent for a long moment, her silver fingers pressed together in a gesture that Garrett had learned signified deep thought. You are certain? Yes. He pulled up the evidence on the display, the months of careful investigation condensed into damning clarity. He's been diverting resources, running unauthorized operations, testing human tactics against soft targets. He's building a network within the military officers who share his views about the peace treaty. Which views? That peace is weakness. That humanity should have been exterminated, not integrated. That allowing me to stand beside you is an insult to every Serani who died in the war. Valeth studied the display, her face unreadable. Dravik is old, and Bauman. He has served the Empire for longer than I have been alive. His loyalty has never been questioned. His loyalty was to the war, to the mission of Serani dominance. Garrett shook his head. When you chose peace, you didn't just end a conflict. You told him that everything he fought for, everything he lost, was meaningless. His son. Yes, Captain Torek. He died at Proxima 4. Garrett paused, forcing himself to continue. Under my command, I gave the order that destroyed his ship. The silence that followed was heavier than any Garrett had experienced. He watched Valeth's face, waiting for the moment when she would see him differently, when the knowledge of what he had done would change everything between them. You knew, she said finally, when you brought me the intelligence about the raiders. You knew that following this path would lead back to you. I suspected, and you told me anyway. Yes. Why? Garrett thought about the question. About Dravik's grief, about the war that had taken so much from both sides, about the fragile possibility of something better that he had glimpsed in this alien woman's eyes. Because if we're going to build something new, it has to be built on truth. Even the truths that are hardest to speak. Valeth rose from her seat and moved to stand before him. Close, closer than protocol allowed. Close enough that he could see the subtle variations in her silver skin, the depth of emotion in those violet eyes. You have given me a weapon that could destroy you, she said softly. Dravik's allies would pay any price to know that you killed his son. They would use it to justify everything they want to do. I know. And yet you told me anyway. Because you asked me about honor, about why humans choose principles over survival. He met her gaze without flinching. This is what I was taught honor means. Speaking truth even when silence would be safer. Trusting someone with knowledge that could destroy you because you believe they won't use it that way. Something shifted in her expression. Something that looked almost like wonder. You trust me? I'm starting to. She reached up and touched his face. The gesture was intimate in Serani culture, he had learned, a sign of deep personal connection. Her silver fingers were cool against his skin, but there was warmth in the touch that transcended temperature. 5 years we fought, she whispered. I killed your soldiers. You killed mine. We burned each other's worlds. And yet here you stand offering me truth instead of weapons, trust instead of hatred. Maybe that's what it takes to break the cycle. Maybe. She lowered her hand, but her eyes remained locked on his. We will deal with Dravik together. Quietly. And when the time comes to act, you will stand beside me. Not as a prisoner, not as an advisor. As what then? She was silent for a moment, searching for words in a language that had never needed them before. As my shield companion. The diplomatic reception on Veros Prime was supposed to be a celebration of peace. 3 months since the formal surrender. 3 months of integration protocols and cultural exchange programs and careful diplomatic maneuvering. The reception would mark a new phase in human-Serani relations, a public acknowledgement that the war was truly over and the future was beginning. Garrett stood near the edge of the grand hall, watching dignitaries from a dozen worlds mingle beneath crystalline chandeliers. His dress uniform felt strange after so many weeks of more casual attire. But protocol demanded formality, and the Empress had insisted on his presence. She was across the room, surrounded by ambassadors and courtiers playing the role of gracious sovereign with practiced ease. But Garrett caught her glancing his way more than once, and each time there was something in her eyes that had nothing to do with politics. He was studying the crowd, noting the positions of guards, the flow of movement through the hall when he saw him. The server, wrong body language, too focused, moving with purpose rather than servility. His tray of drinks was held at an angle that would allow quick access to whatever was concealed beneath it. Garrett's combat instinct screamed. He moved without thinking, shoving through the crowd with a force that drew startled exclamations. The server saw him coming and accelerated his hand, already reaching beneath the tray. The glint of metal. A neural disruptor. Illegal. Lethal. Designed to look like a medical device. Garrett hit him low and hard, driving the assassin into the marble floor with the full weight of his momentum. The disruptor clattered away across the polished stone. The server struggled, but 5 years of combat had honed Garrett's skills to a razor edge. He had the assassin pinned before the guards could even react. The reception erupted into chaos. Voices shouted. Weapons were drawn. Courtiers scattered in panic while security forces converged from every direction. And then Veilith was there, standing over him with an expression he could not read. Are you injured? No. He rose, his dress uniform torn in his hands, still trembling with adrenaline. But you almost were. She looked at the disruptor, at the assassin being hauled away by guards, at the human who had thrown himself between her and death without hesitation. You protected me. Yes. Why? The question hung in the air between them, surrounded by the chaos of the aftermath. Garrett thought about all the reasons he could give. Duty, obligation, the value of his position, the necessity of maintaining the peace. None of them were true. Instinct, he said. You were in danger. I moved. You hate me. I hate what you represent. The empire that conquered my people. The war that took everything from us. He met her violet eyes. But somewhere along the way, my brain decided that you weren't the enemy anymore. You were just you. Something flickered in her expression, surprise perhaps, or something deeper that she did not have words for. Clear the hall, she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of imperial authority. Commander Callahan, come with me. She did not wait for acknowledgement. She simply turned and walked toward a private chamber, trusting that he would follow. He did. The antechamber was small, intimate, lit by the soft glow of panels rather than the harsh brilliance of the main hall. Veilith dismissed her guards with a gesture, leaving them alone. That was foolish, she said without preamble. The disruptor would have killed you if you had taken the shot meant for me. Probably. You did not hesitate. No. She moved closer, her silver skin catching the soft light. We have known each other for months now. We have talked of philosophy and war of honor and sacrifice, of all the great abstractions that leaders use to justify their choices. But I still do not understand you, Garrett Callahan. What don't you understand? How? The word came out raw, stripped of imperial composure. How can you throw yourself into danger for someone who destroyed your civilization? How can you offer trust to someone who killed your soldiers? How can you look at me and see anything other than the enemy who took everything from you?" Garrett was silent for a long moment, searching for an answer that would make sense. "When I was young," he said finally, "my father told me that hatred is a fire. It can warm you when everything else has gone cold. It can drive you forward when you have no other fuel. But if you let it burn too long, it consumes everything. The things you hate, the things you love, and eventually yourself." Your father was wise. My father was a soldier. He died in the first year of the war holding a defensive position so his company could retreat. Garrett's voice was steady, but there was old pain beneath the words. His last transmission said that he wasn't fighting because he hated the Serrani. He was fighting because he loved the people behind him. And that made all the difference. Violet reached up and touched his face, her silver fingers tracing the line of his jaw with infinite gentleness. "5 years of war," she whispered, "and you still remember how to love instead of hate." "I remember that it's possible. That's not the same thing. It is more than most can say." She lowered her hand but did not step back. "The assassin was Serrani. One of my own people tried to kill me. I know. Because of you. Because of what you represent. Because I have allowed a human to stand beside me, to advise me to—" She trailed off, searching for words. "To become your friend." The word hung between them, foreign and fragile, in the space that separated their worlds. "Yes," she said finally. "My friend, my advisor, my—" She shook her head. "There is a ceremony in our culture, ancient, sacred. It creates a bond between two people who have saved each other's lives. Shield companions, we call them. You mentioned the term before. It means more than protection. It means trust, complete, absolute trust. It means standing beside someone not because of duty or obligation, but because you have chosen them, because they have become part of you." She moved to a cabinet set into the wall and produced 2 small glasses, filling them with liquid that glowed faint blue in the soft light. "Serrani ceremonial wine," she explained. "We share it with those who have saved our lives. It creates a debt of honor that can never be repaid." "I don't want your debt." "I know." She handed him one of the glasses. "That is why I offer it. Because you have done what no one else would. Not for reward or recognition, but because it was right." Garrett looked at the glowing liquid, at the woman who held its twin, at the impossible moment that had brought them here. "If I drink this," he said slowly, "what happens? We are bound, not as Empress and prisoner, not as advisor and sovereign, as equals who have chosen each other." Her voice trembled slightly, the only sign of how much this moment meant to her. "I am asking you, Garrett Callahan, to be more than my liaison. Be my advisor, my friend, my shield companion, one who stands beside me, not from duty, but from choice. You're asking your enemy to be your protector. I am asking a man of honor to help me become worthy of my throne." Her hand shook as she held the glass. "I am alone, Garrett, surrounded by millions, but alone. I need someone who will tell me truth instead of flattery. Someone who will stop me when I am wrong. Someone who sees the woman, not the crown." He thought about the war, the battles fought, the friends lost, the rage and grief that had sustained him through 5 years of hell. And he thought about the woman standing before him, not a monster, not an enemy, just someone trying to find a better path. He raised his glass. "To building something new." Her smile was radiant and heartbreaking at once. "To building something new." The wine tasted of starlight and sorrow. When their glasses touched, something shifted between them. Not romance. Deeper than that. Recognition. 2 soldiers, 2 leaders, 2 souls tired of war, finding unexpected alliance in each other. The investigation accelerated after the assassination attempt. Violet's intelligence networks, combined with the information Garrett had gathered, began to paint a picture of the conspiracy's full scope. Druvik had been building his network for months, perhaps years. Officers who had lost family in the war. Politicians who saw the peace as betrayal. Industrialists who had profited from military contracts and feared the economic changes that integration would bring. But the core of the movement was personal. Druvik's hatred. Druvik's grief. Druvik's absolute conviction that peace with humanity was an insult to everyone who had died fighting them. 30% of the fleet, Valeth said, staring at the intelligence reports in her strategy room. He has compromised 30% of my military. Can you remove him? Not without evidence that would satisfy the council. Right now, all we have is analysis and inference. If I move against Dravik without proof, I look like a tyrant purging loyal officers. And if you wait, he moves first. Yes. She turned away from the reports, her silver features drawn with exhaustion. He is not a fool. He knows we are watching. He will accelerate his timeline. Then we force him to act before he's ready. Control the engagement. How? Garrett hesitated. The plan that had been forming in his mind was dangerous. Not just for him, but for everything they were trying to build. He hates me more than he hates you, he said slowly. If we make it known that I've been advising on military strategy, that I've been influencing policy decisions, that I've become your shield companion, it will enrage him, make him reckless. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to force him to show his hand while we still have the advantage. Valeth shook her head. Too dangerous. His people will come for you. That's the point. When they do, we catch them. We get the evidence we need. And if they succeed, if they kill you before we can act, Garrett met her eyes. Then you use my death to unite the moderates against him. Either way, the conspiracy ends. No, her voice was sharp, absolute. I did not bind myself to a shield companion so I could sacrifice him for political advantage. It's not about politics. It's about ending this before more people die. You are my friend, Garrett Callahan, the first true friend I have had since taking the throne. She moved closer, her violet eyes bright with emotion. I will not send you to die. You're not sending me, I'm choosing. Then I choose to refuse your choice. She took his hands in hers, her silver skin cool against his warmth. We find another way, as one. That is what shield companions do. The council chamber was vast, ancient, built in an age when the Serani Empire was young and still remembered what it meant to aspire to greatness. Valeth stood at the central platform, her imperial robes catching the light from 1,000 crystalline fixtures. Beside her, in a position that had not been occupied by anyone outside the royal family for 300 years, stood Garrett Callahan. The announcement had sent shockwaves through the political establishment. A human, a prisoner of war, named as shield companion to the Empress herself. The implications were staggering. Dravik rose from his seat among the military leadership, his scarred face twisted with barely concealed rage. Your Majesty, with respect, this is unprecedented. This is inappropriate. Unprecedented, yes. Valeth's voice carried the weight of centuries of royal authority. But not inappropriate. Commander Callahan has saved my life. By ancient law, I have the right to name him Shield Companion. He is human. He is honorable, which is more than I can say for some in this chamber. The words hung in the air like drawn blades. Dravik's eyes narrowed, reading the threat beneath the diplomatic language. The military will not accept this. Our soldiers died fighting his people. To elevate him, our soldiers died, Valeth interrupted, so that we might build a future worth living in, not so that we could continue hating long after the war has ended. She descended from the platform, moving through the assembled council members until she stood before Dravik. You speak of honor, General, of sacrifice, of loyalty to those who fell. Her voice dropped, pitched for his ears alone, but carrying clearly in the silent chamber. But it was not a Serani who saved me from an assassin's blade. It was the human you despise, the enemy you want to see destroyed. That proves nothing except his cunning. He positions himself to influence you to weaken us from within. Or perhaps it proves that hatred is not the only possible response to our history. She turned to address the full council. We have won the war. The question now is whether we can win the peace, whether we can become something more than conquerors. Commander Callahan has shown me that our former enemies are capable of honor, of sacrifice, of choosing principle over survival. Can we say the same of ourselves? The chamber was silent. Garrett watched the faces of the assembled leaders, reading the currents of opinion that flowed beneath their composed expressions. Some were hostile, some were intrigued, and some were simply calculating the political implications of the moment. Dravik spoke again, his voice tight with controlled fury. You are young, Your Majesty. You do not understand what you are doing. This human has deceived you, manipulated you. When you see the truth, it will be too late. I see more clearly than you know, General. Valeth held his gaze without flinching. The truth is that we have a choice before us. We can continue as we have always been, measuring our worth in conquered territories and defeated enemies. Or we can become something new, something better. She returned to the central platform, Garrett falling into step beside her. Commander Callahan remains as my shield companion. This matter is not open for debate. Council dismissed. The warning came 3 days later. Garrett was in his quarters when the message arrived, encrypted through channels that only his former colleagues could access. The content was brief, urgent. Dravik moving, fleet assets repositioning, timeline accelerated, 72 hours. He found Valeth in her private chambers reviewing security reports that told the same story through different sources. He's coming, she said without looking up. 72 hours, maybe less. The fleet elements loyal to him have been reassigning crews, consolidating ships. She set down the reports and rubbed her eyes, a gesture of exhaustion that she would never have shown in public. When he moves, he will control the orbital platforms above Varos Prime. He can threaten the capital directly. Can we reinforce the platforms? Not without showing our hand. If he knows we're aware of his plans, he'll either accelerate further or go underground. Either way, we lose the initiative. Garrett studied the tactical display, his mind working through scenarios. What about the loyalist elements? How many can we count on? 60% of the fleet, maybe more if we can prove his treachery, but proof requires him to act. Then we let him act, but on our terms, not his. Valeth looked up at him, and in her violet eyes he saw the same calculation that had made her such a formidable enemy during the war. You have a plan. The beginning of one. He moved to the display, pulling up a map of the system. He wants to control the orbitals so he can threaten civilian populations. Standard insurgent strategy, but that means he has to commit his forces to fixed positions, which makes them vulnerable to counterattack. Exactly. If we can draw him into committing before his preparations are complete while we still have ships in position to respond, we need bait. She understood immediately. Something he cannot resist. Something that will force him to act even if the timing is wrong. Garrett met her eyes. I know what he cannot resist. No, the word was immediate, absolute. Valeth? I said no into. She rose from her seat, crossing to stand before him. I will not use you as bait. I will not sacrifice my shield companion to trap a traitor. It's not sacrifice, it's strategy. It is both. She took his hands in hers, her silver skin warm with emotion. You have become too important to me, Garrett. Not just as an advisor or a symbol, as a friend, as someone I cannot imagine facing the future without. That's exactly why it has to be me. Dravik's hatred is personal. It's not about politics or empire or abstract ideology. It's about his son, his wife, everything he lost in the war, and I'm the one who took it from him. You did your duty. I killed his child. I set in motion events that destroyed his family. Garrett's voice was steady, but there was pain beneath the words. I understand his hatred, Valeth. I would feel the same in his position. And that understanding is what makes me the perfect bait. She was silent for a long moment, her violet eyes searching his face. If I lose you, you won't. But even if you do, you'll have what you need to end this. Proof of his conspiracy, justification for action. A rallying point for the loyalists. He squeezed her hands. This is what shield companions do. We stand between our partners and harm. We take the blow so they don't have to. Shield companions protect each other. That is the oath. She pulled him closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. If you insist on this madness, then I will be there beside you, not watching from safety while you risk everything. That defeats the purpose. No, Garrett, it fulfills it. She touched his face, that intimate gesture that meant so much in her culture. We face this as one, whatever comes. That is what it means to be bound. He wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from the danger that was coming. But he saw the steel in her eyes, the absolute determination that had made her Empress, and he knew that no argument would sway her. As one then, he said. As one. She nodded. Whatever comes. The rebellion came like a storm breaking across a calm sea. Garrett was in the tactical center when the first reports arrived. Ships bearing Dravik's colors had seized the orbital platforms above Varos Prime in a coordinated strike that spoke of months of careful planning. Within hours, the general controlled the high ground, his weapons pointed at the heart of the Serani Empire. The planet below held 3 billion souls. Valeth stood at the central command display, her silver features composed despite the chaos erupting around her. Officers shouted reports, technicians scrambled to establish secure communications, and the weight of impossible choices pressed down upon everyone in the room. 30% of the fleet has declared for Dravik, the tactical officer reported, his voice strained. They're positioning to intercept any loyalist response. Planetary defenses compromised. His people have been infiltrating key positions for months. We have perhaps 40% operational capability. Garrett studied the display, his mind automatically cataloging assets, calculating trajectories, evaluating options. The situation was worse than their worst projections. Dravik had moved faster and more completely than they had anticipated. "He's hailing us," another officer announced, "demanding to speak with you, Your Majesty." Valeth nodded once. "Put him through." The main display shifted and General Dravik's scarred face filled the screen. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship hummed with activity, officers moving with the crisp efficiency of a military operation long planned. "Empress Valeth," his voice dripped with contempt, barely disguised as formality. "I trust you understand your position." "I understand that you have committed treason, General. I understand that you have endangered billions of innocent lives. What I do not understand is what you hope to accomplish." "What I hope to accomplish?" Dravik laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I hope to save our people from the weakness you have allowed to infect them. I hope to restore the pride and strength that made us an empire. I hope to purge the alien contamination that stands even now at your shoulder." His eyes found Garrett, and the hatred in them was absolute. "Your demands," Valeth's voice remained steady. "You will abdicate the throne immediately. You will transfer all authority to the military council, which I will lead until proper succession can be established. And you will surrender the human to face justice for his crimes against our people." "His crimes? He killed my son." The words came out raw, stripped of pretense. "At Proxima 4, he gave the order that destroyed Torek's ship. He took everything from me. And you brought him into your inner circle, elevated him above loyalist Serani officers, made him your shield companion." Dravik's voice cracked with rage. "That insult will not stand." Valeth was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries of imperial authority. "General Dravik, you have lost much. Your son, your wife, your faith in the future we are trying to build. I grieve for your losses truly, but your grief does not justify threatening 3 billion lives. Those lives are already threatened by your weakness, by your willingness to embrace our enemies instead of destroying them." Dravik leaned forward. "Send me the human. Let him face the consequences of what he has done. Do this, and we can discuss terms. Refuse, and I will demonstrate what happens to those who betray our people." The transmission ended. The tactical center was silent, every eye turning to the Empress, to Garrett, to the impossible choice that had been placed before them. "No," Valeth spoke the word before anyone else could. Her violet eyes found Garrett's, and in them he saw absolute certainty. "Your Majesty," one of her advisors began, "perhaps if we considered—" "I said no." She turned on the advisor with a fury that had made him step back. "I will not surrender my shield companion to a traitor. I will not purchase peace with the blood of a man who has done nothing but serve with honor." "Valeth," Garrett moved to stand beside her, pitching his voice low. "We need to talk. Privately." She hesitated, then nodded. "Clear the room. 5 minutes." When they were alone, Garrett took her hands in his. "You know what has to happen." "I know what you think has to happen. You're wrong. He has the high ground. He can bombard the planet. Millions will die if we don't find a way to break this stalemate." Garrett squeezed her hands. "I can give you that way, by sacrificing yourself, by buying time. If I go to him, he'll be focused on me. His attention will be on revenge, not on military operations. That gives you time to rally the loyalist forces, to position ships to find a weakness in his defenses. And while you're buying this time, he'll be killing you. Maybe, Garrett managed a slight smile. But I've had a good run, and this way fewer people die. Valeth pulled her hands free, turning away from him. Her silver shoulders were rigid with tension. You asked me to send you to your death. I'm not asking. I'm telling you what needs to happen. And if I refuse, if I order you to stay, you're my Empress, not my commander. I came here as a prisoner. I stayed as an advisor. But what I do now, I do as a free man making a free choice. He moved around to face her. This is what I believe honor requires, Valeth. This is why humans choose principle over survival. Because some things matter more than living. Woot, tears glistened in her violet eyes. He had never seen her cry before. You are my friend, she whispered. The first true friend I have had since taking the throne. You are my conscience, my mirror, the one who shows me who I should be. I cannot lose you. You won't lose me. You'll remember me. Use that. He touched her face. That gesture she had taught him carried such weight in her culture. Be the Empress who chose peace over pride. Be the leader who proved that strength doesn't mean never showing weakness. Garrett, I have to go. You know I do. She was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. I will not simply watch you die. Whatever you're planning, whatever sacrifice you think you're making, know this. She gripped his arms with surprising strength. I will come for you. I will find a way. That is my oath as your shield companion. I know. He smiled and there was peace in it. I'm counting on it. The shuttle ride to Dravik's flagship felt longer than any battle Garrett had ever fought. He sat alone in the small craft watching the stars drift past the viewport. No weapons, no plan, just a strange sense of clarity that had settled over him like a mantle. If this was his ending, at least it meant something. He thought about the war, about the friends he had lost, the orders he had given, the prices he had paid. He thought about Valeth, about the impossible journey that had brought them from enemies to allies, to something that defied easy categorization. He thought about what it meant to choose honor over survival. The flagship loomed ahead, bristling with weapons, surrounded by the ships that had declared for Dravik's rebellion. A monument to hatred and grief transformed into military power. The shuttle bay doors opened to receive him. Dravik was waiting when Garrett stepped off the shuttle. The general was surrounded by armed soldiers, his scarred face twisted with anticipation. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The human who had destroyed his family delivered into his hands. Commander Callahan, Dravik's voice dripped with contempt. The famous tactician, the human who seduced our Empress with soft words and weaker philosophies. I didn't seduce anyone. I just showed her there's another way. There is no other way. Dravik grabbed him by the uniform, pulling him close. We are Serani. We are conquerors. We do not bow to lesser species. We do not make peace with those who murdered our children. Then why are you so afraid of peace if you're truly superior? What threat does cooperation pose? The blow came fast, snapping Garrett's head back. He tasted blood. You will be executed as an example, Dravik snarled. Broadcast across all channels. Your precious Empress will watch you die knowing her weakness killed you. They dragged him to the bridge. The flagship's command center was a cathedral of military technology screens displaying tactical data from across the system. Dravik's officers watched with cold satisfaction as Garrett was forced to his knees before the main view screen. Below them, Veros Prime glittered like a jewel, 3 billion lives hanging in the balance. Activate the broadcast, Dravik commanded. All channels. I want everyone to see this. The screens flickered, then stabilized. Across the Empire, billions of Serani turned their attention to what was about to unfold. People of the Serani Empire. Dravik's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Witness now the cost of betraying our heritage. Witness what happens to those who would weaken us with false peace and alien contamination. He drew a weapon, pointing it at Garrett's head. This human killed my son at Proxima 4. He gave the order that destroyed Torek's ship, that ended a young life full of promise. And for this crime, your Empress elevated him to her inner circle, made him her advisor, named him her shield companion. The weapon pressed against Garrett's temple. Today, justice will be done. The screen split. Valeth's face appeared and Garrett's heart sank. She shouldn't have joined the broadcast. It gave Dravik exactly what he wanted, proof of her emotional investment, evidence of the weakness he accused her of harboring. But her expression stopped him cold. No fear, no desperation, just absolute certainty. General Dravik, her voice carried the weight of centuries of royal authority. You demand I prove my loyalty to our people. Very well. I will prove it by showing them what you truly are. Your Majesty. Dravik's weapon remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes. Don't embarrass yourself further. The outcome is already decided. Nothing is decided until we decide it. She stood from her throne, and even through the screen, her presence was overwhelming. For months, my human advisor has taught me about honor, about choosing what is right over what is easy, about standing for principles even when it costs everything. She descended from the platform, moving closer to the pickup. You want me to abandon him to save myself, to choose survival over integrity. But that is exactly what he taught me never to do. Then you are a fool, Dravik spat, a weak, sentimental fool who has forgotten what it means to be Sarani. Perhaps, Valeth's voice softened but lost none of its power. But I am a fool who will not sacrifice those who trust me. Garrett Callahan came to you under flag of truce. You have violated every code of honor our people claim to value, and you do it in my name. Her eyes glistened. No, I reject this. I reject you. You reject nothing. Dravik's weapon pressed harder against Garrett's skull. Watch your precious human die, and then we'll discuss your rejection. If you pull that trigger, Valeth's voice cracked, and something Garrett had never seen began to happen. Tears fell from her violet eyes. The Empress of the Sarani Empire, conqueror of humanity, ruler of 50 billion souls, was crying. If you pull that trigger, you prove everything he ever said about us. That we are brutal, primitive, unworthy of the civilization we claim to be. I don't care what a human thinks, but you should care what our people think. She gestured, and the broadcast split again. Hundreds of Sarani faces appeared. Civilians, soldiers, leaders, all watching. They are watching, General, all of them, and they will see whether we are a people of honor or a people of murderers. Garrett felt the weapon against his skull, felt Dravik's hand trembling with rage and uncertainty. Your Majesty, he said softly. It's okay. You tried. No. Her voice broke completely. No, it is not okay. You are my friend. You saved my life. You showed me a better way, and I will not let you die for teaching me hope. The tears were streaming freely now. Silver tracks on silver skin. The Empress of the Sarani Empire crying on broadcast for all her people to see. For a human. For him. I surrender, she said. The words fell like stones into still water. Not to General Dravik, not to his hatred or his grief or his vision of what our people should be. She stepped closer to the pickup, her face filling screens across the empire. I surrender my pride, my prejudice, my belief that strength means never showing weakness. I surrender my armor and stand before you as I am. A leader who was wrong, who learned from her enemy, who became better because of him. Silence. Absolute total silence. If his life is the price of your rebellion, Valeth continued, her voice raw with emotion, then take mine instead. Broadcast it. Let the Empire watch their Empress die protecting a human. Perhaps that will finally show you what real strength looks like, what real honor demands. Your Majesty, no. Garrett struggled against his guards. Don't you dare. But she was already moving. The transmission showed her walking toward a shuttle already coming for him. I will not ask my people to sacrifice for principles. I won't die for myself, she said. General Dravik wants to prove that humanity has corrupted me. Very well. Let him prove it by killing me alongside the man who taught me what we had forgotten. Let the history books record that the last Empress of the Sarani line died because she refused to abandon a friend. Dravik lowered his weapon. His hand was shaking. Around the bridge, Garrett saw it. Soldiers exchanging glances, uncertainty replacing certainty, doubt creeping into the revolutionary fervor that had carried them this far. One of Dravik's officers spoke, his voice hesitant. General, the civilian channels, they're exploding. Data feeds appeared on the secondary screens. Across the Empire, billions of Sarani were watching their Empress weep for a human, watching her offer her life for his, and the reactions were not what Dravik had expected. Admiration, respect, support flooding the networks like a tide. She's willing to die for him, someone murmured. An empress for a conquered enemy. That's not weakness, another voice said. That's honor. Garrett finished the thought quietly. That's what real honor looks like. Drevik stared at him, then at the screen where Valeth's shuttle was approaching, then at the faces of his own soldiers. The certainty that had driven him for so long was crumbling. I don't understand, he whispered. How can you love them? They're humans. They killed my son. They destroyed everything I cared about. And the war killed your wife, Garrett said, his voice gentle despite the weapon still hovering near his head. It killed millions on both sides. It took everything from everyone. He met the general's tortured eyes. The question is, do we keep killing each other or do we finally stop? My son is dead, and nothing that happens today will bring him back. Garrett's voice cracked slightly. I know, General. I know because I'm the one who killed him. I gave the order at Proxima 4. I watched his ship come apart, and I've carried that weight every day since. Drevik's weapon hand fell to his side. You knew. I found out after I came aboard. I could have kept it secret. I could have let you discover it on your own, let you use it against me. Garrett shook his head. But that's not who I want to be anymore. The truth matters even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The shuttle bay doors opened. Footsteps echoed through the suddenly silent bridge. Valeth walked through the assembled soldiers as if they did not exist, her tear-stained face fixed on Garrett. She crossed to him, ignoring Drevik entirely, and helped him to his feet. You came, he said, his voice rough. Of course I came. You are my shield companion. She touched his face, not caring who watched. Did you think I would let you face this alone? I was trying to save you. And I was trying to save you. A fragile smile broke through her tears. It appears we are equally foolish. But we are foolish as one. He took her hand, and that makes all the difference. Drevik watched them, his weapon forgotten, his rebellion crumbling around him. The soldiers who had followed him were lowering their weapons, looking to each other for guidance that no longer existed. I don't understand, he said again, his voice hollow. After everything, after all the death and hatred, how can you stand there like nothing happened? Valeth turned to face him, her hands still clasped in Garrett's. Everything happened, General. We cannot undo the past, cannot bring back those we have lost, cannot heal all the wounds that war has inflicted. She released Garrett's hand and moved toward Drevik, toward the broken man who had tried to destroy everything she was building. But we can choose what happens next. We can choose to let hatred consume us as it consumed you, or we can choose to build something new from the ashes. She stopped before him, close enough to touch. You wanted me to prove my loyalty to our empire. I just did, by choosing the values that make us worthy of being an empire. Drevik's legs buckled. The general who had commanded fleets, who had plotted rebellion, who had held 3 billion lives hostage, sank to his knees before the Empress he had tried to overthrow. My son, he whispered. My wife. Everything. I know. Valeth knelt before him, meeting his eyes with compassion instead of triumph. I know, General, and I am sorry, truly sorry, for your loss, for the war that took so much from all of us, for the peace that came too late to save your family. How can you, after what I've done, because someone has to end the cycle of pain. She glanced back at Garrett, and the smile on her face carried the weight of everything they had been through. A human taught me that. A human I was supposed to hate, supposed to use as a symbol of our victory. Instead, he showed me what we had lost in becoming conquerors. He showed me that honor transcends species, that compassion is not weakness, that the bravest thing two enemies can do is choose to stop being enemies. She rose, extending her hand to Drevik. The rebellion is over, General. You will face justice for what you have done, but not as a traitor, as someone who believed in our people's strength, even if you were wrong about what strength means. Drevik stared at her hand for a long moment. Then slowly he took it. The aftermath took weeks to untangle. Drevik and his core supporters were taken into custody, their trials conducted with careful attention to law and precedent. The general himself remained silent throughout the proceedings, his fire extinguished, his purpose dissolved. The fleet elements that had supported the rebellion were integrated back into the regular command structure, their officers evaluated individually rather than condemned collectively. Most had genuinely believed they were serving the Empire's best interests. Valeth chose rehabilitation over punishment wherever possible. The political landscape of the Serani Empire had been transformed. The image of the Empress crying for a human willing to die for him had spread to every corner of their civilization. It had become a symbol of something new, something that transcended the old categories of conqueror and conquered. Garrett found Valeth in the Memorial Garden one evening, a quiet space aboard the Sovereign's Grace, where holographic images of fallen soldiers shimmered in the soft light. She stood before the image of a young Serani officer, his features bearing a family resemblance to the scarred general who now awaited sentencing. "Captain Torek," she said without turning, "I had them add his image here, and the others who died at Proxima IV, Serani and human alike." Garrett moved to stand beside her. "The council approved. The council is learning that my approvals are not always required." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Besides, it felt right. They all died for what they believed in. That deserves remembrance regardless of which side they fought for. Drevik's sentencing is tomorrow." "I know." She turned away from the memorial, her violet eyes finding his. "I have decided to commute his sentence. Exile instead of execution. He will spend his remaining years on a remote colony, stripped of rank and privilege, but alive. That will anger the hardliners. Let them be angry. I am tired of death being the answer to everything." She moved closer, close enough to touch. "The council wants to give you a medal, the Star of Eris, our highest civilian honor." "I'm not a Serani civilian." "No, eh." She smiled, and there was warmth in it that made the memorial garden feel less somber. "You are something else entirely, something we have no classification for." "What's that?" "The enemy who became a friend, the conquered who taught the conqueror, the human who reminded us what we were supposed to be." She reached up to touch his face. "The man I cannot imagine facing the future without. I just did what felt right. That is what makes you extraordinary." She took his hands in hers. "In your position, most would have sought revenge, would have looked for ways to weaken us to continue the war through other means. Instead, you sought understanding. You offered truth instead of deception, trust instead of manipulation. You made it possible. You actually listened, because you were worth listening to." She squeezed his hands. "When I cried for you on that broadcast, I was not crying as an empress. I was crying as a woman who finally understood what it means to care about someone more than victory or power or pride." "Valeth, I do not know what we are, Garrett. Friends seems too small a word. Shield companion is closer, but still incomplete." She searched his face, looking for something only she could see. "Perhaps we are simply us, two souls who found each other across a battlefield and chose to build something better than war." He smiled, pulling her closer. "I can work with us." When they stood together in the memorial garden, surrounded by the holographic images of those who had fallen, the soft light painted them in shades of silver and shadow, two figures from different worlds finding common ground in the space between stars. "The integration councils want your input on the new joint academies," Valeth said after a while. "They think you should help design the curriculum, teaching young Serani and humans to work together." "That sounds like a disaster waiting to happen." "Probably." She leaned into him, her silver head resting against his shoulder. "But you will be there to help them through it, just as you helped me." "I didn't help you. You helped yourself. I just was stubborn enough not to let you quit." She laughed, and the sound filled the garden, like music chasing away the solemnity of the memorial. "Yes, infuriatingly stubborn. It is one of your more endearing qualities." They left the memorial garden as the ship's lighting cycled toward evening, walking through corridors that no longer felt alien to Garrett. The crew they passed nodded respectfully, some even offering small smiles. The human who had once been a prisoner was now something else entirely. They made their way to the observation deck, a vast space where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the majesty of the cosmos. Stars wheeled slowly past as the Sovereign's Grace maintained its orbit above Varos Prime, the world that had so recently been threatened with destruction, now peaceful beneath them. "The war ended 5 years ago with humanity's surrender," Garrett said quietly, watching the stars drift past. "But the real surrender, the one that mattered, happened on that flagship. When I surrendered my pride. When I surrendered my hatred. Valeth straightened, turning to face him fully. When we surrendered the idea that we had to be enemies. She placed her hand over his, the gesture of trust and friendship that had become their signature. And in that surrender, we found something worth fighting for. Not territory or power or victory. Her violet eyes held his, filled with an emotion that transcended the gulf between their species. Just each other. And the fragile, precious possibility that sometimes the right kind of surrender is the bravest thing two people can do. Garrett lifted her hand, pressing it briefly to his cheek. You know, he said, when they assigned me to be your liaison, I was certain I was going to die. That you'd parade me around for a while and then find some excuse to execute me. I considered it. I know. He smiled. What changed your mind? Valeth was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. The first time you corrected my tactical analysis, in front of my generals without hesitation or fear. You simply told me I was wrong, explained why, and waited for me to decide what to do with that information. She shook her head. No one had done that in years. No one had dared. But you did because the truth mattered more to you than safety. That made you want to keep me alive. That made me want to understand you, to learn how someone could be that certain, that uncompromising, and still be capable of compassion. She touched his face again. You were a mystery, Garrett Callahan, and I have always been drawn to mysteries. And now have you solved me? No. Her smile was radiant. But I have realized that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be lived. The observation deck hummed softly around them, the ship's systems maintaining the perfect environment that allowed them to stand together before the infinite dark. Beyond the windows, the stars of the Empire stretched into infinity worlds that had known only war, now facing the uncertain promise of peace. What happens now? Garrett asked. Now we build. Now we prove that everything we said on that broadcast was more than words. Valeth straightened her shoulders, the Empress returning even as the woman remained. There will be setbacks. There will be those who cannot let go of hatred on both sides. There will be moments when it seems impossible. But we will face them as one. That is the oath we have made. She took his hand, intertwining her silver fingers with his. Whatever comes, wherever the path leads, we face it as shield companions. As one. As one. They stood in silence, watching the stars wheel past. Two people who had been shaped by war, transformed by understanding, bound by choice rather than circumstance. The surrender had been humanity's. The victory had been the Serrani's. But what emerged from the ashes belonged to both of them, to neither of them, to something new that was still finding its shape. Garrett thought about everything that had brought him here. The battles fought, the friends lost, the hatred that had sustained him through 5 years of hell. And he thought about what had replaced it. Not forgiveness exactly. The scars were too deep for that. But acceptance, understanding, the recognition that the universe was vast enough for more than one truth. The historians will write about this, he said, about the war, the surrender, the rebellion, about the Empress who cried for a human. Let them write. Valeth squeezed his hand. We will be too busy living it to care. She led him from the observation deck through corridors that no longer felt alien toward a future that neither of them could have imagined when the war began. Behind them, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal creatures. But for two people walking hand in hand through the halls of a ship that had been built for war and was learning to serve peace, those stars held something they had almost forgotten existed. Promise. The war had ended with surrender. But from that surrender, something new was being born. Something worth all the pain, all the loss, all the terrible choices that had brought them here. Not victory for one side or the other. Just two people who had chosen to stop being enemies. And in the end, that was enough.